Welcome to the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast, where we have real conversations about all things homeschooling from a Canadian perspective. I'm your host, Lisa Marie, and I'm joined with my co-host, Alaina. And in this episode, we're going to be talking about homeschooling multiple kids, especially when there's learning challenges involved. So grab your favorite drink and come join us on the couch. All right, so I know that over the years, we've both had challenges with trying to figure out how to juggle multiple kids and learning. So the first question I have is, how did you do that?
Yeah, if looking back, it's funny because you kind of think, oh, how did I get through the various challenges that I had? I'm kind of focused on the challenges I have right now. But as I think back, there was a variety of things that we did do. Definitely choosing specific curriculums that would work for our situations. For my one child, needed a lot of movement, using adaptations and kind of accommodations to help them. I think it was definitely challenging because I have a full spectrum of needs at my house. There's always been a real variety of challenges. It's not like all the kids struggle with this. And I'm pretty confident that's probably the way it is in a lot of homes where you have a great variety. One child can be super strong in an area, and then, at least in my house, then another child, that can be their greatest struggle. And it can be very challenging, very frustrating, and very draining. But there are ways that we have done things over the years to kind of help with that.
Right. So me too. Things have changed and morphed over time depending on my kids' skill levels and interests and attention spans and age. You know, it's all changed and morphed as we've been homeschooling along the way. In general, I think there's kind of two ways that you can at first approach homeschooling when you've got multiple kids. The first is to do group learning, and this is probably one that you hear a lot when you ask in a homeschool group. Just teach them all together. So I thought I would talk about that first. So what is group learning? Group learning is when you essentially teach everybody at the same time. Simplification there, but it's when everybody comes and sits together and you do learning as a family. And this can be things like morning baskets. Have you guys ever done morning baskets at your house?
We have, but not in the morning. We did lunch baskets. I just found the morning, it just wasn't an ideal time for us. And I mean, that's the flexibility of homeschooling. You can do it when it works for you. So we would do a lunch basket basically by all sit down together. I tend to eat a little bit faster than especially some of the younger kids when they were younger, and then do the reading or whatever it is we're doing part of that basket during that time.
Right. So a morning basket is basically just, it doesn't even need to be morning, as we said. It's just called morning basket, I guess, because some people like to use them first thing in the morning all together. And it really depends on your family and what you guys like to do. But morning baskets are essentially when you put a container together with some of the subjects that you want to have everybody do. For some families, that might be Bible reading time, or it could be poetry time, or music, or art subjects. I know some families even do things like some of the core subjects, like they do history together and social studies, things like that. They might have a read aloud that they're doing. So a morning basket is essentially just a basket of things that your family is going to do together for the day. So that's one way that you can do learning. And this can also be something that you can do in your core subjects as well. So depending on the levels of your kids, things like math may be challenging to do, but you can do stuff like language studies together, and you can do science studies together, depending on the interest and levels of your kids. But there's curriculums that offer you the opportunity to all be studying the same topic together. So you do a group activity together, group learning together, and then it gets expanded on from there. There are some pros and cons to this. I know for us, I used to do group learning. We used to do unit studies, and I loved doing unit studies. I still love doing unit studies. My kids, maybe not so much, but I do. Some of the really great things about doing group learning together is it's just a simplification of your homeschool day. So instead of having to think about all the kids that you have and all their individual needs and what they're all independently learning, everybody's learning the same thing together. It keeps you all on the same page. It makes your brain kind of all streamlined. It's kind of helpful that way. It also gives you more time together as a family because, well, if you're learning all together, you're learning all together, and you get to spend time together and have conversations together, and it allows for everyone to participate in the learning together. So even if you've got a high schooler and a grade 1, they still are studying at different levels, obviously, the main idea, and can have a conversation about that idea. So it's kind of interesting. But for our house in particularly, it ended up not working out for the long term because I had problems where everybody's different needs weren't being met. So I would have my oldest sitting on the couch paying attention diligently, like a good little student. Well, the next one down was trying to figure out how to flip his pencil in his hand, and he was focused on that. And the other one, the number 3, would be staring off into space. And then a little brother would be practicing his wrestling moves off the top of the couch onto one of the older siblings. And the baby would be crying in my lap, and it became chaotic mess. So that was group learning didn't really work for us over time as we added more kids and as we discovered there were different learning challenges with our kids. Sometimes in a group setting, some of the older kids might not be challenged, or the younger kids may feel lost because you're adapting your curriculum to a general level to try and meet everyone's kind of learning range, but it doesn't always meet everybody's range. So for us, that was one of the challenges we had. And the last is that depending on the sibling dynamics in your house, there may be trouble with fighting or attention getting, or people feeling that they're not getting what they want out of the moment. Like they want mom's attention and it doesn't seem fair that seems like she's paying attention to somebody else, even if everyone's all together. So that's some of the things I saw when we're doing group learning. So for us, most of the time, especially when my kids were elementary school level, we found group learning a bit of a challenge for a lot of areas in our homeschool day.
Yeah, I think for us, we've definitely had some of those struggles as well. I think different things have worked at different ages. I can remember when I just had 2 kids homeschooling plus a baby. Well, and my middle child at that time was very young. So more of just a tag along plus the doing the stuff for the oldest. So, she would tag along while we did stuff. So kind of group learning, but it was more geared towards the oldest. So that worked. Maybe the baby was sleeping or nursing or playing, quietly or whatever. I think it just depends on the family situation. Maybe you have a little child who is very, very busy and, doesn't play quietly, but it kind of changes as the kids change ages and stages. It depends on just so many factors, I guess, over the years. Once I had the 3 older kids and then I had a baby, then that changed again. Sometimes we could try to do some group learning when the baby was sleeping. I remember doing a lot of read alouds where I would sit in the very center of the couch and I'd have the baby on my lap, usually nursing or sleeping on my lap, and 2 kids on one side and one on the other, strategically separating the 2 that would always fight, that kind of thing. So it just, things change and adapt over the years, just like you said. But I really think that for us, group learning sometimes just wasn't able to happen. But over the years, the one time that really, I would say, worked the best was the read alouds. At times, it did get to the point where, especially because we have such a large age gap in my family, where some of the times I'd want to read a book to the older ones, but the younger one, I didn't really want hearing about that topic at that stage. So that got complicated. There's so many types of families out there with so many variety of ages. I think you just got to figure out what works for you. Sometimes we would, it would be nap time for the little one, and then we do that group read aloud. But typically the only thing that really worked over the years for us was group learning with read alouds or audiobooks. And sometimes art, nature studies, we would do that. Kind of worked better, I would say, for group learning, because the younger kids could kind of run around outside while the older ones could do a little bit more in depth. And then social studies we sometimes would do as group learning. So through the years, those are some things we did. But overall, I would say that especially when you have, several kids or a bigger age gap like I did, or, different kinds of difficulties with learning or other special needs like we have in our family, then it can be really difficult to do the group learning and make that work. Don't beat yourself up if it's not working. Every family is unique. Every homeschool is unique. Everybody's different. And so if you're trying to do the group learning and it's just not working, then think about, well, why isn't it working? Can that be fixed? Maybe it's just the situation you have, the season you're in, or the children that you were given, and this is what you can do, and you don't need to do group learning if it's not working.
Yes, I think that's important, because that seems to be the instant answer that you'll hear is, group them together for stuff. And if it's not working for you, do not feel like a homeschool failure, because it doesn't work for every family. I'm one of those families that didn't work.
For us, like, it worked in certain seasons a bit, but definitely like if we had to try to do like language arts all together, like there's no way. The age gaps, one child super, super struggling and another child very advanced in that area, like it just would not have worked.
Yeah. And I too have a giant age gap between my kids because I've got like a 6-year gap between the older 3 and then the younger 2. So one of the things that I have found has worked was once we got to the point that we could do some group learning together, I divided them in half. So it'd be like, okay, now we're doing group learning with the younger kids. We're going to do our stuff together. And then we do a couple of group learning things with my teenagers as we do high school kind of things. So it's become I do 2 schools, like that kind of idea, right? So it's like group learning with the littles and group learning with the bigs. So that can happen as well. So it can break it down if you have the ability to do that with your kids, if there's that gap.
Yeah.
So
for us, just the different special needs and learning struggles and the different age gaps. Like I have the 3 older ones and then a 7-year gap and then a younger one. So yeah, that wasn't really possible with us. I guess the only time that really worked was when I had somebody napping. So then we would try to do something, mainly just when I had the 3 kids and the youngest of the 3 was napping. Then we would do the group learning with the 2, but everybody's different.
So the alternative to that is doing rotating kids. As I said in that example of my kids' chaos in the living room with all 5 of us sitting there, I remember my husband was home. He must have been off from work that day, and I was busy trying to still make it work, because that's what you got to do. But it was just madness and mayhem. And I've told this story before, but I actually just broke down crying in the middle of the living room. And my husband goes, "What is going on?" And I just started bawling, like sobbing. And it came to that point that it was time for me to make a decision about our homeschool, about how it was running, or I needed to quit. Those were kind of like how it was at the moment because it was so overwhelming. Nobody was learning anything and I couldn't keep up with the chaos that was happening. So that was the time that I sat down and I realized group stuff right now isn't going to help me in my homeschool. So we need to find a different way to learn. And I thought, okay, it's time for me to do each child one at a time. And I'm like, oh man, I'm literally going to be doing school from 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. because I've got way too many kids and this is going to take forever. I was really nervous about that. I was really worried that the day was going to just become school and that's all it would be. And I'd be so burnt out by the end that I couldn't do housework. I couldn't work. Like I really thought it was going to be too much. So I ended up spending time with each of my kids and talking with them about what they wished school looked like, how they learned the best. I asked them if I had to teach you something, what would be the best way for you to learn that? We had conversations like that. We also spent some time, I spent so long researching curriculum options. So instead of me pulling together a unit study, I decided it was time for me to look at what else was out there in the environment and see what I could find for our family. And I spent a lot of time putting together individual learning plans for each child and their needs and the skills, the levels they at and their interests and that kind of thing. And then I started doing rotating through kids. So I'd focus on one kid at a time until I got through them all. So some of the advantage of this is that you do get this really awesome intentional connection time with each child when you do it that way, because now you have to have quality time with each kid as you're doing your learning. Lots of flexibility in your planning and your learning plan with each kid because you can choose specific to each child. But some of the other challenges I found with this plan is that the other kids can be really distracting. So when I'm like, okay, it's time to work with this child, the other one's like, I'm going to play chess at full volume with my other sibling. And that's not distracting to the kid that wants to be playing chess with them. That's what happened today. The other thing is that it does take a little bit more time to get through the day than if I had all of my kids together and we just learned together. I do find that's true, but it's still not like the 8 to 8 plan that I thought that I was going to end up doing, because you can learn to kind of give some level of independence to some of the older kids. The other thing too is you may have to move around the house because you have to find the kids and move to wherever they're willing to learn. And if that distraction piece is there, I often end up in my 16-year-old's bedroom with the door closed, so him and I can focus on his schoolwork without being distracted by siblings. So that's one thing too. And yes, it can be a little bit more costly if you're buying independent curriculum for each child, but it also means that you can personalize, as I said.
Yeah, for sure. I would say that we've done many of the same types of things. I know that at one point I did try having 2 or 3 of the kids at the table, and then I set up like one of those, those things they use in like, I don't know, science fairs that are like trifold cardboard things. I got one at the dollar store, and I tried to set that up so that my one child that was like easily distracted by, visual things around them could be less distracted, and then they could use headphones too. And I mean, that worked at one season. I wouldn't say it worked awesome. We ended up doing where we would go somewhere else. So say when I was doing rotation, I'd be working with one child, and then I would assign, say, the older one to something they could do independently. And then another one, okay, now you play with your brother doing, this, well, I do that. And then we would go off usually, to the child's room with the door shut and work there, because it was just so distracting. And I don't have a large house, so where else do you go and try to not be distracted by visual or the noise? That was one strategy we tried that might work for some people, the divider thing. And headphones, definitely, either just for noise canceling or for having some kind of music, if that doesn't distract your child. I don't really understand that. I have some kids that actually like hearing music without words while they're working, and it actually helps them. That is not the case for me. So you have to figure out what works for your child. But that can be a helpful thing as well.
All right, so we've given some good ideas of the basics of how to do multiple kids, but let's talk a little bit about making a plan to homeschool multiple kids. So the first question I think to ask is, what can you realistically include in your day? Because there's only so many hours available each day. So think about what responsibilities and activities and needs do you have to juggle and handle alongside homeschooling? And how much time does that leave for you to do intentional learning? Can you divide that up between each child? Because I think that will impact your decisions towards what curriculum to use, how many subjects to include in a day, what extracurriculars you're going to sign up for, what homeschooling method you're going to choose. I think thinking of things like that will help you be able to make better decisions. So first, thinking about what time block can you put aside for homeschooling, and then that will help with some other things.
And I think that when you do have kids that have struggles in whatever area or special needs in whatever area, you really need to be giving yourself grace that it's not going to look the same as your friend's homeschool or somebody you read online that doesn't have those challenges. And so I think that some of the ideas well, you're working with one, your other one can go do independent reading. Well, what if that child that you want to go do that independently is dyslexic? Then, okay, what do I have to do now? Well, maybe they could, listen to an audiobook while they draw, or, so you have to kind of adapt things according to whatever your child's needs are. And just be realistic too, that if you have a child with special needs that struggles, say, with emotional regulation, then that's going to take up a lot of time. And so you're not necessarily going to be able to cover as much with that child if you're dealing with that. And you might need to give yourself grace and say, okay, maybe this child needs something a little more independent and they can handle it because I've got this child over here that's, taking up a lot of my time in this way. I think it's important to note too that if you do have, say, a couple of children with different kinds of needs, and then you have a child that's doing well, that you also want to make sure you don't forget about the child who's doing well and just push things off to make it all independent. I mean, I struggled with that, and it was easy just to say, okay, go work on this. And I knew that they would do it. I knew that it would be done well. I know that they'd be learning, but you have to make time for them too. So it's a real juggling act. And I think that if you do have any of those unique challenges in your family with kids, then you just need to be giving yourself grace and be compassionate to the fact that you're going to have your homeschool look different, and that's okay.
Yeah, I agree on the whole give yourself grace, but I also agree with don't forget about the child that's quote unquote doing great. I struggled with that because when my oldest was in grade 7 range, he was really good at independent. He would come downstairs, he'd get his books out, he'd sit at his little spot that he liked to sit in, and he'd chip away at the books that we had for him. And I thought, oh, he's doing great. I'm like, do you need any help? And he always said no. And we just let him go. And then several months into the school year, I sat with him one day when I had a chance, and I opened his books, and the answers were, I don't know. I don't care. I'm like, yeah, so all that time he'd been working, he hadn't been working. He just was answering the questions, and I don't know, and I don't care. No. So, yeah. So it just reminded me how important it is to make sure that each child gets some time to check in every day. even if it's not specifically about school, like you can still just check the schoolwork, but it's just making sure that you're touching base. Because I made the assumption he always looked like he was working really well. He always was
Yeah.
sitting there being really diligent with his school books, and he'd always finished everything and pack up and put it away, but he really wasn't doing his schoolwork. So that was a mom fail on my part, and I feel really guilty about that in sometimes. But it's just still about the challenge of making sure you rotate through everybody, not just the ones that
Yeah.
need the extra
Yeah, I
struggle.
think taking that time every day to make sure things are going well with whatever they're doing independently is definitely important. I know a friend that she told me that she had her child doing one subject independently so she could work with some of the younger kids, and she just thought it was going great because he was doing so well with this, and it was something online. I forget what it was. Turns out later she found out he was super smart and somehow had hacked through the system. So she didn't realize that he was doing really well because he'd hacked it. So he wasn't actually doing the work. So yeah, you definitely need to be on top of this, especially with the age where they start trying to do things like that.
Let's talk a little bit about curriculum options when you've got multiple kids.
Okay, so I know that you kind of have to think through, I guess, think about what you desire, but then probably do plan for to do even less than that. And I know that's something I have had to learn. I think, okay, this is my grand ultimate plan, all the things that I'm going to do, and then probably half that or even more, because you realistically, that's not what it looks great on paper, but it doesn't work, especially when you have multiple kids, multiple ages, age gaps, any kind of special needs or struggles with your kids. The more of that you have, I think the more you have to realize the grand plan is probably going to not go exactly like you want. I think you need to keep that in mind. You know, maybe it works really great for some families to do specific types of programs, but don't look at the ideal, look at the what is realistic. What is realistic for my family with my number of kids, with my age gaps, with my struggles, with my kids' struggles, with all those things, and then come up with something like that. So I know through the years, we have utilized some video stuff, some online stuff, as well as the book type learning. We don't really stick to a specific homeschool style because I just would find things that would work for whoever in whatever situation, wherever we're at. I do think, though, sometimes it can get more expensive that way because you're not reusing everything with every child. But I have children that are so unique from each other, it just wasn't possible with most things. But I mean, if you can resell when you're done, or even if you buy secondhand to begin with and then resell, you're even losing less money. That can really help. Yeah, I think you have to really consider your own family when you're looking at homeschool curriculums to choose.
Yeah, so I agree with that. Some of the things that I have realized over the years as I've started to focus more on an independent scale as opposed to a group study. So I will say there's lots of really great group options if you are looking to try and combine kids into learning times. There are programs that are specifically geared for the morning basket kind of situation. But there's also programs like Gather Round, which are intentional to help with family learning times. I know that's a popular one lately. There's also some older ones called like Weaver. They also are, and Tapestry of Grace and Konos,
Yeah.
Konos. They're
Yeah.
all kind of like group family learning programs so that you don't have to work independently with kids. So if you can do group learning and want to do group learning, there are some options there for you to look at. When they a lot of them run like cycles of years so that you repeat things over in a 4-year cycle so that everybody gets to cover every topic over the time with some more advanced add-ons as you go through. So that's kind of one of the things. Another thing is if you are doing independent learning or you're trying to do like rotational learning, pick a program. So when you're thinking about curriculum programs and you're going through your, okay, what do I want in a curriculum? And we can have a whole conversation about how to choose curriculum, but there's a series of questions that you need to ask as you're trying to narrow it down, because never, ever, ever, ever go Google homeschool curriculum because you'll be so overwhelmed with all the options that are available out
Yeah.
there that you'll run away screaming. So one of the questions when you're trying to think about independent learning for each of your children and rotational learning or whatever you're doing is to think about how much time you have to give each child. If you pick a curriculum that is going to require a lot of parent prep, can you do that? If you've got lots of
Right.
kids that need to go through. So for example, I really enjoy the program Write Shop. but it is parent heavy and it's very game centric. So it requires me to like prep stuff and it makes sure I have things around to do things. So it's not as, like I can't just send a kid off to go do the curriculum. Like I have to teach it, I have
Right.
to do it, that kind of stuff. Whereas if I picked a curriculum like maybe like The Good and the Beautiful, they literally open the book, do the pages,
Yeah.
done for the day. If you're trying to think about how to streamline your learning, maybe consider what amount of prep work and parent involvement is included.
Yeah, definitely. We have always erred more towards the side of, making that a priority is figuring out how much parent prep is involved. And there's been a couple programs that I got that were too parent intensive and then they just ended up not getting done. So I learned that for the most part, if it's more open and go, then we're more able to do it, with the exception of when you have specific learning challenges. So my child that has dyslexia, we needed something that was quite involved and involved a lot of parent involvement for her to progress in that area. It involved me being there a lot, but it was still pretty open and go in terms of there wasn't a lot to prep or think about. I don't like those programs that, say you need all these different materials that you need to get. Although there are some things financially might not be possible, but I know sometimes there's like whole kits you can buy, say for science, and it's got all the equipment that you might need in a kit that you can buy. So there's been times when we've done stuff like that where it's just like, hey, I really want to do this program, but there's no way I want to go to the store and find out, okay, where do I even buy? I remember it's plaster of Paris once. Where do I even buy that? And okay, now I found it. Oh, great. It comes in this giant box and I need like a quarter cup, and then, so it's just so much simpler. I think you need to definitely take into consideration your time and your effort and simplify as much as possible. Although, like I said, finances can get in the way of that sometimes. If you have something already prepped for you, then sometimes it can be something that's more expensive. So I would say that's worth it if you can do it, for sure. Make things
Yeah.
easier, especially with multiple kids and special needs. You need to make life as simple as possible.
As I mentioned, I'm into unit studies. So I loved planning the curriculum, putting everything all together, making the big plan, blah, 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 blah. One of the things that actually worked after that massive meltdown was buying a curriculum that literally said, do this today. And that was it. If I couldn't give the child the work to do independently, it literally had parent guide says, today you're going to do XYZ. And I could sit down. I didn't have to think. I just like opened the book and I did what it told me
Yeah.
to do that day. Having a curriculum that did that took so much pressure off me, especially
Yeah.
when I was trying to float through 3, 4, 5 kids at a time. It was Oak Meadow and I loved Oak Meadow and it was fantastic for that time period. So for me, it was worth the investment and
Yeah.
it made my life so much easier. So I recommend thinking about how much energy do you have to give.
Yeah, and also like actually don't just order something. And I mean, I have done this. I've been like,
Mhm.
oh, everybody's in my homeschool group is talking about this curriculum. Maybe I should get it and have a
Mhm.
check it out. And then I'm like, oh, that looks neat too. And then add to cart, add to cart, add to cart. And, then I get it home and I'm like, oh, this isn't really going to work for my family with my age gap and our needs. Great. Now what? So I think it's really important to think that through. I mean, over the years, I think it's normal to make curriculum mistakes, but I think as much as possible, doing things like asking a friend to really take a really good look at it before you buy it, or look online, like flip throughs on YouTube or whatever it takes to see if it works for you. Don't just buy it because everybody's talking about it. Maybe I should try it, because it just doesn't work for every family. And so I think we need to consider that when we're looking at curriculum.
Yeah, don't do the shiny button current curriculum that's out there. So look for what's right for your family. Another option that you can do, especially if you have multiple kids and you need to rotate through them or you need to provide times where you're focused on one and another needs to be busy, there are online options that you can use that can allow kids to be independent and can provide some feedback for you so you can make sure they've done the work. Like, for example, teaching textbooks tends to be a pretty popular one. As an example, it doesn't work for every family, but it did work for our family for a period of time. It allowed kids to log in. They liked being on the computer. They had a lesson and a series of answers they had to complete, and they were graded on their work for the day. And I could see what they were doing and how they were doing it. It didn't work forever. We got kind of bored of it. Some of my older kids, we had to switch to a different curriculum just to keep their math engagement going. But it did allow them to be okay, go do your math. And while they're doing math, I can focus on the next kid who needs help with language or something like that. So we were able to use tools like that, or even like programs like Reading Eggs in the with the younger ones. Something that was an online program that allowed my kids to be focused on school time while I focused on another kid.
Yeah, we've definitely used some of those things as well. I know I've used, we tried Reading Eggs. It really wasn't a good fit for my child that had dyslexia. So we stopped that. That's the only one I tried that one with. But yeah, teaching textbooks, even some online stuff like drill type things. There's Cetera for geography. You can like put little markers, I guess, on different places they ask you to find. There's also Shepherd software as well. So my kids did a lot of, just math drills. They're little games that can help you learn your math facts. Little things. I remember we did a whole bunch of stuff on naming all the provinces and territories and capitals through those kind of games. We've used History Plus, so they cover history, science, or geography, depending on where they're at in what they're teaching. And History Plus is really cool because it's engaging, it's video based, things like that. Or I would even set them up with, here's your video list that I want you to look at, these couple of short videos on these topics and, watch those while I'm helping this child. Or even saying you're going to go to your room and you can, do a craft or do some art or play with a toy, maybe a building toy while you listen to an audiobook. And then we can discuss it when you're done. So things like that, definitely utilizing things online, video, audio, arts and crafts stuff. So they can be occupied while you're engaged with another child, definitely help.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about some of the adaptations we've made with our special needs kids or our different learning kids or whatever we want to call them, unique learners. Is there anything else that you have found really helpful to kind of help with making this all run smoother when you've got a child that has different needs than the other ones?
Yeah, definitely. I know for some families they have a pet and that can help kind of calm and regulate a child that has some kind of unique needs. For us, we haven't had a pet like that, cat or guinea pig or whatever. Letting my kids do things like bring their stuffed animal to the table to pet while they're doing their schoolwork, having fidget toys of whatever kind works for them, having things like whatever seating they want, maybe they want to sit on the couch or they want to sit on the floor. Or for a while, my one daughter, when it was good weather, would do her work up in the tree. Like I really just made it flexible, as long as they were learning and getting done what they needed to get done. I know some families have like those big like exercise bouncy ball things they can use. I thought about that, but I thought for us it might just be too distracting. You can even get these like little things you can sit on that can kind of buzz or whatever to keep I don't know exactly how they work, but they keep you more focused apparently. I've thought about that, but haven't tried one. One of my children did really well with a wobbly stool. So you can get those and they kind of wobble around. Yeah, some of those things have really helped. I know like adding movement to learning. So things like using the stairs to go up and down while you do spelling words, or maybe I call out a math fact and every time you say the answer, you go up a stair, or throwing a ball back and forth while we're working on math facts, or, the alphabet with a little one or whatever. Adding movement as much as possible or taking movement breaks. With my one child, I would say, okay, do 3 math questions and then run 3 times the loop that goes through the kitchen, dining room, living room, and then sit back down, and then 3 more math questions and then, a loop. I think it just depends on the child. Some children, I think that would probably rev them up. So you got to kind of experiment what works for your child. Does that rev them up or does it calm them down and allow them to keep working? I think specific seating too. So I know at our house, like we're really into the birds and we have a bird feeder outside the dining room, which is where we do our work. So my one child that would constantly be distracted by the birds, I would put her back to the birds. And she would have other times when she was free to watch them. But when I wanted her to focus on math or whatever, she'd have to have her back to them, or it would just be constant, look at that, never getting anything done. Yeah, I already mentioned headphones and using that cardboard divider worked for a while, but headphones definitely, whether you're noise canceling or the having music usually without words helps. Having their own space. Some kids need to work where there's people around. Some kids need their own space in their own room, maybe setting up a desk of some kind or a table or whatever in their room, or maybe they want to work on their bed. Just being flexible with that and allowing them, if they're getting their stuff done, then I didn't have a problem with where they were getting it done. So those are some of the adaptations that we've done. Oh, another couple of things was using a checklist. So once a child gets old enough that they can read well and they can actually keep track of that, having an actual checklist, however you want, like maybe it's written out per day and they check it off, or maybe it's, printed off a computer and laminated so they can cross it off and reuse the sheet, whatever it is, whatever works for your child. Some children thrive on a checklist, even stuff they do. Then they can kind of see, okay, I have just that left, or these 3 things left. And even doing like visual timers. So say, you want your child to do, reading practice for 20 minutes. Well, some kids, that's really hard to know how long is 20 minutes. Like, it's just kind of a vague thing, especially any children that struggle with learning. They're probably going to struggle with time. ADHD as well really struggles with that. So having a visual timer, you can actually buy them, and it can, count down for you some way. You can have different kinds. There's ones that have the actual numbers printed on it and show you with the colored part that moves and goes, shows the 5 minutes, and you can see it moving. You can do sand timers. They're even cheaper. Whatever kind of works for you, that can really help a child know, okay, that's all I have left, and keep them focused for the time you want them to be focused.
Those are some great ideas. So I was thinking about your little divider. I was too cheap and we couldn't afford anything. So I literally used cereal boxes because we go through cereal so much. We would open them up and they each got their own cereal box cover. So that's what we used instead.
That's the beauty of homeschooling, like to think outside the box, especially if you have, financial struggles, either for just a season or long term. You have to think outside the box when it comes to these kinds of things. And speaking of that, I know sometimes the library can be a really good resource for finding those kind of materials. There can be so many different things. I know a friend wanted to try the Life of Fred math curriculum, and so she actually got it through interlibrary loan, which is a free system at most libraries. And she was able to try it out and see if it would work for her kids. Libraries can have all sorts of different things that can work and offer something else that maybe you want to try with your kids, but you aren't sure what works. And I think that's really helpful, especially when you have these kids that struggle in things, to be able to try things out first.
Yeah. So some other ideas that I had for adapting kind of the learning day with you when you've got special needs is, one, I have found that most of my kids who've got ADHD or variations thereof need more mom time while they're doing school. I can't just say, here's your list, go do your list, because they won't do the list. They'll find 153 other things to do.
Right.
Other than the list. So if you have children that are like that, you need to make sure that you intentionally set aside time where you're going to sit beside your child. It may not be that you're actually doing the lesson with them. It might just be that you're physically beside them. In your schedule for the day, just block off a chunk of time that's literally sit with child A. So you can do lessons, they can ask questions, you can keep them on task. That's something. Another thing can be to lower your expectations for the day. I found that one of my kids was terrible at transitions. So I would make this plan of, okay, we're going to do math, we're going to do language, we're going to do spelling, we're going to do music, we're going to do gym. Like, that would be my plan for the day. And it became a nightmare. We would struggle through math, and then transitioning to language became a huge fight. And then I gave up on language, but we couldn't get to spelling, and then music would be fine or whatever. And then movement would be fine too. It's just the transition periods between trying to shift subjects with that individual child couldn't work. So what I ended up doing was changing our schedule for the day for him in particular. So it would be, instead of having 5 subjects a day, I literally would have 1 subject a day, or it'd be math and something. And that's it. For a long time, that's what we did, because it allowed me to have less transitions to do with that child, and it allowed me to stay on task. So we would make sure that we actually get through subjects instead of always fighting about what's next. If they knew that they had to finish their math for the day, and they only had to do language for the day, and they only had to do science for the day, then it made it a lot easier to work on transitions. And it also gave me more time with all the other kids, because I wasn't fighting to transition through all the lessons along the way. So that's one of the tricks that I found. Also, I agree with you about having the big, beautiful plan with all the different subjects and all the things and that and that and this. In reality, pick the things that are the most important to you and your family. Yes, I know in some provinces you're going to have to follow whatever the curriculum requires you to do, but you can also often pull things like music and things like art from other subjects. So it may not need to be its own individual subject, but I will tell you at the end of the day, pick the things that are most important to you. So for me, that's math and that's language skills. So if we get
Yeah, for
nothing
sure.
else done within the school year, as long as my kids can do math and as long as my kids can read and communicate, that was the most important thing for me. And I agree, using a timer saved me so much effort. If it's like, listen, if you focus for the next 15 minutes, we'll be done. And if they can't focus, guess what? The timer gets stuck back up. Sometimes I would
Yeah.
do that. They like, you have to do it 15 minutes. Let's just go. And sometimes it's literally, if all we get done is one math question in 15 minutes, that's all we're doing today because that's what we're going to do. Other times
Yeah.
it's, I see that you're being silly and you're not having a good time. Can you go run up the stairs to your room, do 5 jumping jacks, come back to me, and then we're going to reset the timer for 15 minutes and we're going to work. It gave
Yeah.
them kind of constrictions and it gave me a guideline for kind of how long we're going to be stuck doing math. So I don't smack my head on the table while they're smacking their head on the table for a different reason, that kind of thing. So
Yeah. I think it's important too to realize that with any kids, but specifically also kids who have trouble with focusing or some kind of struggles, is to realize you might not get through the whole lesson that day, and that's okay. Stop either to take a break, like you just mentioned, run upstairs, do your jumping jacks, come back and try again. Or if it's still really not working, then I just took sticky notes and stuck them on the page for that day. And I might even make a little note on the sticky note, like really was struggling with this because as a mom, my mind is a million places and I might not remember. That way I can just open the book, be like, oh yeah, that's what it was. And then we keep working on it. I remember specifically with my child that struggles with reading and doing the reading lessons, it would say, this should take 20 minutes and you can do this one lesson. And I would just cut it off at a certain point. Okay, we did this long, we're done. And it wouldn't matter if we were done the whole lesson. So that's something to keep in mind. I think too, like when you have a child that say they struggle with sitting still and focusing, then maximize the sit time. So say you're like, okay, I really need you to sit to do, whatever this is, your handwriting practice or your math or your spelling or whatever it is. First of all, look for ways to add movement. Like I said, maybe it works for them to spell out loud while they're walking up and down the stairs for each letter. Maybe that doesn't work for them. But there's certain things you need to have them sit for. So maximize that by doing the sit time for those, but not requiring as much sit time for the other things. Maybe they want to do their, reading by, hanging upside down while they're reading. I had a child that did that a lot. Or maybe while you're reading out loud to them, they're walking around the room. If they can still tell me what they're learning and, give me good input on, discussions, then it doesn't matter. I remember when I was a kid, there would be teachers that would allow us to doodle and teachers that wouldn't. And I did so much better if I was doodling. I mean, even as we're talking, I have a whole page full of doodling. I think we need to let go of some of those ideas that if kids are moving around, they're not paying attention, especially for our kids that have any kind of focus needs or struggles. It's really important. And you can kind of just, test it by like, hey, what did we just talk about? And they can answer, great. I think our kids that have struggles as well need as much hands-on as possible. So, doing things. I know my one child just really struggled with anything in a video format, didn't want to sit and look at a screen, or reading loud was difficult unless I allowed movement or coloring, drawing during it. That did help some, but even then, the more hands-on, the better for that child. And all the kids are different, and I think that's important to note as well. And then also focus it if you can on their specific interests. So say, okay, I need to cover science, but I guess this depends where you live in Canada and what the rules are. But here in Ontario, if you want to cover science, you don't need to cover something specific. And so, say they're really interested in, weather or plants or whatever, well, then focus on that. That can really help a child who's struggling. Just keep their interest. And definitely don't neglect outdoor time. I know that can be hard sometimes depending where you live in the winter. For us, we've just always gotten the good winter gear. That was a necessity where we are, and with wanting to get that outdoor time, it can really, really help kids, and I think moms too, to be able to have your child get outside, get a break. It really, something about outside, it just refreshes us. Everything seems less frustrating outside. If your child struggles with, being very loud or being very distracted, it doesn't matter outside. It's not, caught all within the walls of your home. So that would definitely be something that I would make sure happened every day. If say it was like -40, then yeah, we might skip it that day. So My one child was known to put on goggles and like complete like no skin showing and go out even for a little bit. But most of the time you can get out for a while and do things, and that can really help.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit about it, but I have two other things to think about. One is, what are the kids who aren't doing school right now? What are things that we can do to keep them distracted so they're not interrupting? And two, the scenarios when we've got little ones who we know are rather needy. So let's talk about first some ideas that we can fill up the time with, and then let's talk about life with littles. So I know at my house, when I do school right now, I've got high schoolers and I've got elementary schoolers. So I often focus on the younger ones first because, well, my teenagers don't get out of bed as early as the other ones do. So we tend to do the younger kids first. And I do school time with them and then off they go. So to fill up the time when I'm now focusing on the teenager, I either need to lock us into his room so he's not distracted, or I give the kids activity boxes, or they can go outside, or they can play with Lego, or they can play on their computers, or they can play video games. I really don't care what they do with their time as long as they're not getting into snacks every 5 minutes or destroying the house. No burning my house down, please. That's kind of my rules. But there's lots of things that you can do. And I think part of it is, okay, writing that checklist. So I use a whiteboard often, and it's today we have to complete this. And some of the things on that whiteboard could be having a shower or going to 15 minutes of exercise. I don't care where that is in the house, find a place to do it. Could be in the basement in our exercise room, and I put that in quotations because it's mostly just a Bowflex and a treadmill and a little mini trampoline in the basement, but it makes them feel like they're going to the gym. And then, or they can go outside and swing and play, do puzzles or games. Chess is a current one that's on our table. It's just sitting there. So anytime somebody comes by, if they get bored, they can sit down with a sibling and play chess. So just having things available for them to do. If you don't really want them on technology, for example, you have things out and about for them to learn. I know that in one of the homeschool methods, they call it strewing. I believe that's in Charlotte Mason, where it's literally putting things that you want kids to focus on out and about and available for them to explore. So that's one option too.
Specifically with littles, I know they can get bored quickly with things and need constant changes to kind of keep their attention. Their attention span isn't as long. So having like specific things like on Monday we pull out this, on Tuesday we pull out that. I don't know, that was a little bit too organized for my life. So I would just tend to just switch things up as I noticed that they were bored. So, oh, let's, we keep some toys in the living room, and then kind of the overflow of toys is in the basement on shelves. And so I would just go down, grab something, and bring something from upstairs, downstairs, switch it out. That can keep their interest and keep them more occupied while you're doing school with the other kids. And yeah, giving them your time first was something that is important with littles. So making sure you spend some time with them, then they're not constantly feeling left out. They have that time already. Utilizing nap times. If your child naps, that can be really helpful. It doesn't always work. Maybe you have a bad napper, or your little one is not napping anymore. That can be the case. I know when my son was born, he napped way better on me. I know some people frown upon that, but that's how I parented. If whatever worked best, I just went with. And a lot of the time he was sleeping in a baby carrier on me as I was doing schoolwork with the other kids, or nursing on my lap, and then fell asleep, and he'd just stay there. If you have multiple kids, ask one of the other children to do something specific with the little one while you're working with somebody else. Depends on your own family situation. Maybe you don't have a child that's able to do that for whatever reason. Another thing we did a lot of was give the little one a snack in the high chair. I know the one thing that worked the best for us was often things I had to actually like take time to pick up one by one, like, Cheerios, for example, or I would make homemade popsicles from smoothies. So I knew it was all, healthy stuff, and it takes them a while to go through one of those, and it helps with teething as well. So a lot of, high chair time. I know we also did some stuff where it sounds kind of silly, but if the day was really not working out too well and your child's, old enough that they can, toddler age, sit in the bathtub by themselves, then just bring the one child right into the bathroom with you while the other child's in the bathtub. So kind of a silly idea, but it worked when I was desperate. I could keep an eye on the toddler and be there. And then another thing when we got desperate was, okay, we're going to do, talk about this, but we're going to do it outside, or we're going to put the toddler in the stroller and, push them on a walk or let them run along while we discuss whatever it was. So some of that as well. I don't know. You just need to be kind of creative for whatever stage you're at and wherever you find yourself, I guess, and think outside the box about some of the options.
Yeah, those are great. And if your youngest one is almost school age and wants to be cool and do school, then you just give them like printables that you can find. They can scribble on it, or old school books that the other kids have finished using. Or you can even go to the dollar store and buy like those maze books or whatever, like little activity books.
Yeah.
It makes them feel super special because they're doing a school book just like the big kids. Or you can get wipe off books. They're also really good as well. They're handy for kids. I do agree with the safe space idea, and not just the high chair, but what I used to do is we would literally baby gate ourselves into a room.
Oh, yeah.
Then everyone would be trapped together. So sorry, kids, you can't leave. But that way I knew that the toddlers were safe in the room with us. And then I could focus on each of the kids, and the toddler could crawl on me and the baby could crawl on me and the toddler could get into mischief because it was a safe space. It was still all their toys and I could control the room. So if they were getting into something, I could easily, find them or whatever, but it help with that as well. Another is breaking the day up into chunks. So especially if you've got little ones, so maybe you can get everyone to focus on math in the morning. Well, the younger one, their love tank is full. As you said, pay attention to the first, give them lots of quality hug mom time or parent time, and then they can be happy for a little while. So then use that time to focus on the things that are really important that you need to focus on. So everyone's doing math, and then we take a break and we have snack and we go outside and we go play, and then we come back and then the baby goes for a nap. So now we're going to focus on the next thing that needs really focused attention. And then in the afternoon, while everyone's playing outside, maybe you do hands-on science or something like that. Like if you can't do school all at once, that's totally fine. Break it up however it needs to happen throughout the day.
I've even heard of some situations where it's just not working during the day to do things as well as they want. And so they'll do some of the stuff on a weekend when the other parent's home, or maybe they can't get to read alouds during the day because it's just not working with one of their younger children. Just, they're not napping, they're running all over, they're distracting everybody. So they just make sure the read alouds are done at night when perhaps that younger child's gone to bed or when the other parent can help. So there's so many ways to be flexible, and it doesn't have to be done just one way or however, you read about online or a friend from your homeschool group, because everybody's unique.
Exactly. And I think that's the key takeaway here is when you have multiple kids, the most important thing to remember, flexibility.
Yeah. And that changes over time. I think that's what makes it frustrating, though, is that you're just like, oh, yes, this is working. I have a system. And then somebody goes through a different stage and grows and changes in some way. You're like, oh, now I got to come up with another system. Yeah, that does get hard, but you adapt.
All right. I think that we did a good job talking about how we have homeschooled different levels of kids, different numbers of kids with different challenges and needs, and different levels in our lives as well. And as I said, we think that the most important thing is flexibility and paying attention to your own kids and what they specifically need, not what you see everyone else doing. Pick the thing that's working for your family. Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Canadian Homeschooler Podcast. We hope you got some new ideas on how to teach multiple kids, especially if you're dealing with learning differences. In our next episode, I'll be chatting with Diane Geerlinks from Geerlinks Educational Therapy about the idea of how to teach to your child's learning styles. If you have any feedback, ideas for topics, or people we should try to connect with for interviews, please let us know. And don't forget to share with your Canadian homeschooling friends. Thanks so much for joining in. Until next time, happy learning.